So a lot of us have been conditioned to recognize certain things that are symbols that make someone Jewish, right? Magen
Hmm.
David, Chamsa, Chanukiot.
Right.
But the actual kippah, which is also something that people recognize, which is a head covering that men wear, didn't always look that way. If we look at images of our sages and great rabbis of the past, Rabbi Akiva, Shimon Bar Yochai, Ben Yishchai, Rashi, all these individuals, which everyone would see as a great rabbi from the past, none of them are wearing kippahs. They're
Right.
all wearing a sudra on their head, which is a head covering. And some people think that it looks Arab.
Like a yeah.
And the reason they think that is because Arabs also have a head covering that's called a keffiyeh,
Right.
but so do Kurds, and so do Druzim, and so do many other cultures within the Middle East, because this is what Middle Eastern cultures used to wear on their heads. Now, how do we go from wearing a sudra, which is written in many places in our Jewish scripts, to a kippah?
Right.
So Jews that were living in Europe had a Ashkenazi experience. They had an experience in Europe, and because of persecution that they were going through, they had to minimize the sudra into a small head covering that they could hide under a hat. Because everyone was dressed in black coats and hats, that was the dress at the time, and they wanted to blend in order to not be recognized as a Jew to be killed. So they minimized the sudra into a small head covering that they put on their heads, but it would be hidden with a hat. And so that's how we transitioned from actually wearing a sudra, which either was worn like this or was worn
Right.
wrapped all around, and eventually we lost it. Now, for Jews that were Sephardic and Mizrahi, many of those Jews kept it. My great great grandfather, there's a very famous picture within our family that he's wearing a sudra on his head, so it was always an image that I grew up with. But many Jews also lost it that were Sephardic and Mizrahi, and it's because many of us living in certain lands were treated as dhimmis. It was a secondary status, and you couldn't have a two-story house if your Muslim or Arab neighbor had a one-story house.
Pay a jizya
Exactly, you
tax.
had to
Yeah.
pay a tax. You couldn't be on a horse or a camel if someone was standing next to you that was Arab. So you always had to be put lower. And one of the things that we were forbidden to wear was the sudra. And so, since Sephardic and Mizrahi Jews had connection with the Ashkenazi Jews, and the Ashkenazis had evolved from wearing a sudra to a kippah, so many Sephardic and Mizrahi Jews also began wearing a kippah. And part of the reason why we brought it back is because I think it's a beautiful part of our culture that has been lost. And that if we went back 2,000 years ago and met our ancestors wearing kippot on our heads, they'd be looking at us like, "What are you doing? Why did you
What does that
minimize
say?
our culture?"
So,
And so I think,
well, that's actually an interesting point that I was thinking as you were explaining kind of the evolution of the kippah. I think that the argument could be made. I mean, today it's probably already a culture, a tradition. It's built in many ways to to our modern identity. But the argument I think can be made based on what you've just said that it's almost an acquiescence to our previous injury
Mhm.
that we should go back by all intents to the sudra.
Right. So I'm very open to evolution, but I
Right.
also look at the source. The source of why we changed from a sudra to a kippah is because we wanted to hide our identity. And so, because for me that source is illegitimate or wrong or has trauma and pain, I don't want to necessarily fall into it. Now, I do wear a kippah sometimes when I go to synagogue, when I go to different religious events, and sometimes I wear the sutra, and I don't think it's a either or type of thing. But
Okay.
I would like for our generation of Jews to know what the sutra is and to wear it if they're proud. And it's not only for men; it's also for women. You can wear it as a scarf. You can wear it as a head covering. You can wear it in many different ways. It's an element of Jewish culture that's been lost, but in this generation is being brought back.